Thank you for coming out today for an announcement regarding the release of the Montgomery County Police Department Preliminary Audit Report. My name is Caroline Sturgis, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for the County Executive's Office, and I will be moderating the briefing today. Today, we are joined by County Executive Mark Elrich and partners from County Council, the Police Department, the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 35, and Effective Law Enforcement for All. Our agenda today includes remarks from our County Executive, Mark Elrich, followed by remarks from Council President Tom Hucker, Council Member Will Jawando, Assistant Police Chief Willie Parkalone, Vice President of the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 35, Lee Holland, and the President and Chief Executive Officer of Effective Law Enforcement for All, Mr. David Douglas. Following all of the speaking, we will have a presentation from Mr. Douglas regarding the observations and recommendations of the preliminary audit report. At the conclusion of that presentation, we will then open it up for questions. So with that, let us begin with our County Executive, Mr. Elrich.
I want to start off by thanking everybody for joining us here today. I want to thank Council President Hucker and the Council Member Will Jawando will be making remarks. Vice President of the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 35, Lee Holland, who's joining us, and David Douglas, who's joining us today. And I think this is a momentous moment for Montgomery County. Today we're going to be releasing the executive summary, and the preliminary draft will follow very closely. I'm especially thankful to those who are standing here with me to offer remarks about the report as well. The history of this process goes back to before this committee was created. After the shooting of Robert White, and after a public meeting that I convened on policing in the county more generally, we determined we were going to seek more data from the department, and that we're also going to bring in outside expertise to help us rethink how we do policing in the county. We recognized before the murder of George Floyd that changes were needed, and I have been determined to make them. We had money in the budget before the George Floyd killing to do this study because we recognized internally that we had issues that we needed to deal with here. Then almost a year ago, I stood before you to announce the launching of the Reimagining Public Safety Initiative with an amplified concern about incidents involving police use of force, racial and social injustices, as well as with issues regarding the structure and funding of police. This initiative was launched so we could have a thoughtful discussion and review of our public safety efforts. It was clear that simply legislating on individual issues in the face of specific events in the moment that they arose would never deal with the underlying circumstances that created expectations, directions, actions, attitudes, and culture. We were being reactive, and being reactive didn't get us to the core of what we think the issues are. In many cases, actions that have drawn strong reactions in our time were actions that were normal and trained for and expected. Many of the things that people, whether it's Montgomery County or other places in the country, find absolutely unacceptable today were perfectly normal 5 years ago and 10 years ago. Whether they were acceptable is a different question, but they were certainly more normal. And I think, there's obviously been a changing shift in culture and the willingness to accept things that has led to so much of the pressure for change, which I think was badly needed. We've tended to see everything in the light of individual actions, when in many cases people were following a playbook. And this is perfectly evident in the murder of George Floyd. The officer who murdered Mr. Floyd was actually training new officers at the time. And but for the body camera footage and the bystander footage, what would those officers have learned if Mr. Floyd had died and there had been no prosecution and they saw their trainer show them how to handle a suspect and without consequences? So this is the kind of thing that I think strikes deeply into the need for reform, not just in Montgomery County, but elsewhere. Since the last time I stood before you to provide an update on this initiative, we've made progress in the county's reimagining public safety effort. Yesterday was an historic day for the county. The council confirmed 3 new assistant police chiefs. The new assistant chiefs will support Police Chief Jones in ushering in what will be a new era with MCPD. And I'm especially excited that our new chiefs now include the first civilian assistant chief. The newest and historic role will help us lead to work with communities directly and help build relationships and greater trust between officers and the communities. Our residents deserve to have confidence in MCPD in serving and protecting everyone, no matter what neighborhood or zip code they live in. And this is a familiar thing. We say the same thing about schools. Your zip code and your neighborhood shouldn't determine your educational outcome. It shouldn't determine how you get treated by the police. It shouldn't be any more than an address that you live at. One aspect of reimagining public safety that I felt was essential to making real change was the need for an independent audit. I wanted a comprehensive evaluation of our police department, including a review of policies, procedures, and practices to identify, evaluate, and recommend structural and systemic changes necessary to achieve reform and innovation within the department. So we partnered with Effective Law Enforcement for All, a well-known and experienced organization that has conducted this kind of work, and we asked them to assist us in this important evaluation of the police department. Today, after months of evaluation, we stand here to release the executive summary and the recommendations of the audit report. The audit's not complete and will continue over the next couple of months, and I'm committed to being transparent and providing community stakeholders with periodic updates. The report reflects many of the themes we saw from the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force report that was released earlier this year in February, which recommends a range of programming and policy initiatives to help us to consider as we advance our public safety and racial justice strategies. This audit evaluated the police department leadership, education, accountability, and practices. The preliminary findings of this audit make recommendations to make changes to the organizational of Montgomery County Police Department, its internal affairs system, including approaches to handling uses of force, mental health responses, recruitment and hiring, and assessment of the training academies. The findings indicate a need for greater accountability in our processes and procedures, as well as changes in training and tactics. While concern about police use of force is often framed as racial, black, brown versus blue, it's important for us to recognize the intersectionality of race and mental health crises in police use of force. We've been witness to tragic cases in this county where the use of force involving black or brown people involved the mental health component, and we did not have adequate resources to address these situations any other way than with the police. Thus, the reforms recommended in the preliminary findings of the audit are focused on strategies that will have officers that are better equipped to address situations where mental health may be a factor, thus minimizing the need for force as well as reducing the number of incidents. In addition, our budget already contains additional increases for mental health supports that will be available to address these events. At the time of those killings, we had one CIT team in the county. The odds of that team getting to a place where somebody was in crisis and potentially creating a situation where they'd be putting their own life in jeopardy was pretty much slim and none. If you think about the killing of Fernand Berhe, I think it was 1 minute and 19 seconds. I think it was 1:19, 1:29. You don't have time for someone to drive from Rockville to every place in the county. And so we're going to have teams that are closer to the community and can arrive on the scene much quicker. And there'll be training of our dispatch officers as well in terms of giving the officers the information they need probably to respond more appropriately to the scene. There's a lot of work we need to do. In consideration of the current organizational culture, policy, and resources and procedures, the audit recommends improvements to both existing and future public safety standards through implementing standards for policing that I envision for our community, and one that is equitable for all residents. I want to thank the Effective Law Enforcement for All for their partnership with the county to provide a comprehensive evaluation of MCPD and producing this meaningful report. And I want to thank them for enduring these meetings with me that are like an hour and a half on each topic, and I ask probably a lot of questions. But you've been really supportive and really helpful. I'm proud of this comprehensive and forward-thinking report, and the work of the Reimagining Public Safety Initiative is a critical step and a series of coordinated efforts between government and communities to rethink and reshape how the county can deliver services in a more equitable manner. More importantly, it reinforces that public safety is more than just a police issue. This county already has taken steps to divert people from the criminal justice system with drug courts, mental health courts, and in this budget, support for decriminalizing homelessness so that homeless people don't pile up an endless series of convictions and fines, which they're never going to be able to pay, and just simply makes them more and more unemployable as they develop a deeper and deeper police record, often for things like littering. This is not helpful. I want to thank Chief Jones and the department for their cooperation and commitment to this process. They provided the information that ELE 4A needed to do their evaluation. Chief Jones couldn't be here today because he's on a well-deserved vacation. I've seen a bunch of people off on well-deserved vacations. I get, coming out of COVID, that there's a great need for people to take a breath, and I do appreciate his work on this. The next step in this process is to share the findings and recommendations of the audit with the community, and next week I'm hosting a community forum that I, along with Chief Jones and others, will be at to listen to some residents' feedback. Today is an important step forward in our efforts to reimagine public safety and our police department. There's still work to be done to finalize the audit, but I'm excited about it. Montgomery County has a good police department, but there are areas that we will need to embrace change. The report will not be something that gets filed and put on a shelf, but rather it will become a blueprint for action. The report provides evaluations of what we're doing, and that includes what is good, while not sugarcoating what needs to change. We recognized at the outset the need for outside assistance in the process of evaluation. It's helpful to have an evaluation done by people who have some distance from what and who is being evaluated. Any good organization has to be able to look at itself and seek to determine what changes need to be made to meet the current and future challenges that it faces. That's what this audit is about, the future. In this process, we need to own the fact that the history of policing in this country, and even in our county, has not necessarily been a model of justice and equity. I grew up in Montgomery County, and I remember how black kids felt about the Montgomery County Police and just the fear of being pulled over or stopped that me and my friends didn't have. And that's, and that's only 50 years ago. Or is it 60 years ago? Somewhere in that time. It's a while ago. For better or worse, people's views of policing derive from their own personal experiences and from the experiences of their communities. And we bear the weight of history, for better or worse, as well as the weight of the present, where disproportionality is still more than just a rare exception. We stand with the communities around this country that are saying that this is no longer acceptable for the present to be the model for the future. And we will, in our county, bend our system toward a more just and equitable model. We're a diverse county. We need to ensure that all our residents have confidence that people who are sworn to protect them will do just that. I'm confident that this audit and the other steps we will take will get us there. Reimagining is not a buzzword. It is essential to building the department of the future. And today it's important to step in that direction for Montgomery County, and we're going to do this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elrich. As Mr. Elrich has stated, the police chief is not here today. He is on vacation for a pre-approved family commitment. We do have representatives from the police department here, including Assistant Chief Willie Parkalone. We are also joined here by additional assistant chiefs. Yesterday, the county council confirmed the appointment of 3 new assistant police chief. The historic moment of that included the appointment of a new civilian assistant chief. So this is the first time that Montgomery County Police Department has ever had a civilian in such a leadership position who will be responsible for overseeing our community's resource bureau. So those assistant chiefs, let me make sure I get all of their names correct. We have Assistant Chief Dinesh Patel here with us, as well as Assistant Chief Darren Frank, Assistant Chief Mark Yamada, as well as our new civilian Assistant Chief, Carmen Fichallo. So thank you very much. Next up is our Council President, Tom Hucker.
Thanks very much to County Executive Elrich and to Chief Jones and his team, and congratulations to all the new assistant chiefs. It was nice to see Chief Jones interrupted his family vacation briefly yesterday to log into the council meeting just to give his personal recommendation for all these gentlemen, and he did a great job. And I know all of my council colleagues are really looking forward to enhanced work together with all of you. I'm very, very grateful for your service and looking forward to your work ahead. I want to thank Councilmember Jawando, who's here, and thank you for your leadership on many of these issues. And I've spoken to our Public Safety Chair, Sidney Katz, who wanted to be here but had a pre-existing engagement. But all of us on the council have been very much aligned with the county executive and working closely together to move forward on a lot of these issues. And this today's announcement is a real step in the right direction. Thank you so much, David, for everything you're doing to give us this interim report. Was really glad to be part of the interview when ELE4A was selected, and really appreciated your answers and your approach to some of these issues that have been around for a long time. They're not going to go away overnight, but we're all very committed to working closely with you to address them and give our residents the best police force that we can have. The problems examined in this report aren't really new, and so it's so important that we have this report now and can move forward together. The report's very thorough, and it's a great start and lays a great foundation for the final report, and I really look forward to reviewing the final report and hope it will, and I trust it will, identify very concrete steps that the county exec and the council can follow to improve accountability and transparency and effectiveness and increase public trust in our police force, things that we all want. Many of the recommendations in the report already align with some current and proposed legislation that the council's been considering, and I'll highlight just a few. One is the work you've done looking into the use of force in internal affairs investigations aligns closely with legislation I've proposed, enhancing our review and communication of body camera incidents and enhanced training to district supervisors in use of force investigations, and consideration of whether even our plainclothes officers should be included in body-worn cameras. The work you've done on mental health response aligns with so much work that we're already doing and have in mind in the future. Police officers are not social workers, and they shouldn't be expected to work as social workers. I grew up in a police family, and I'm married to a social worker, and I know they have I know they have very, very different jobs, and neither one would do the other one's job very, very well, and they're both very important. So I'm really grateful that your report underscores the need for enhanced mobile crisis units, and grateful to the county exec for acting on the council's recommendation to expand those in the FY22 budget that we just passed. We've also been pushing for years for street-level clinical social workers working with our residents experiencing homelessness in Silver Spring, and we see the need for that every day. That's been enhanced, and we're not done addressing that problem. We're going to need to do more in that area, and I'm glad that you're on board with that as well. And third, the recommendations you have for education and training, are great. One recommendation that stood out to me, and I would love to see MCPD take up, is hiring a civilian PhD as director of academics or co-director of the academy. And the recommendations on recruitment and hiring, I think, are very, very sound too, starting with increasing the starting salary for our officers. We need to be much more competitive in the Washington metropolitan area. The last survey I saw during the discussions of our budget, and glad that Vice President Holland is here for this as well, is that we were 10th out of 12, I think, in the metro area. That is just shameful. And we can't treat our officers that way. We're not going to be competitive. We need to be competitive. Even our county seat, Rockville, is now advertising that they pay our officers a higher salary than Montgomery County does, and that should never happen. We want the best officers in the region, if not the country. We have to put our money where our mouth is. We have to act like we value their training and their service and pay them like the professionals that they are. But I'm really glad to be here with you today, grateful to the county exec and my colleagues for pushing this report forward, and very eager to work with you to implement the final recommendations as soon as we have them. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. County Executive Elrich, good to see you. My colleague, Council President Hucker, the dynamic duo here. That I was joking with Assistant Chief Yamato when we came in. He said, "You can't, you might regret this. I don't know if you want to take it back." I said, "No, definitely not." Really happy to have the new civilian chief, and obviously the current folks are pretty good too, you know, Mr. Patil and Willie Parker Lone. So good to be with you. You can't fix a problem if you don't diagnose it. There can be no reconciliation or healing without truth-telling. And that's what this interim report is a part of. It's a part of the diagnosis and the truth-telling process that we must go through, as the nation is going through it, to deliver equal justice to all of our residents. We have dedicated men and women serving, guarding, protecting our community. Many are in this room, some that have done it their whole lives. But the fact remains that if you're a white person in Bethesda, you experience policing differently than a black person in Briggs Cheney. That's just a fact. And it's unacceptable. The statistics underscore the point. If you're an African American in our county in 2018, despite the fact that black residents accounted for 19% of the population, they accounted for 55% of those who had force used against them in an interaction. They accounted for 50% of the arrests, both for adults and juveniles, in and out of school, despite being 19, 20% of the population. Thanks to a study that I put forward from our OLO and our colleagues' support, we took action on this data. We know that you're 7 times more likely as a black resident to be pulled over in Bethesda than a white resident, despite the demographics of Bethesda. You're 3 times more likely countywide. These are the facts. And it's facts that I'm well aware of. We're here in this building 21 years ago. I served as an AmeriCorps member with the Montgomery County Police Department. I was in the 3rd District. I played McGruff the crime dog in schools. I logged evidence, went on ride-alongs, and answered the phone. And I did that for a year to earn money to go to school. And I did it because I grew up in a part of our county where public safety was needed. I grew up in Quebec Terrace in Long Branch, where I heard gunshots out of my window. And when I was a teenager, I lost a best friend to gun violence. So I understand the dichotomy of needing safety, but also experiencing it unequally. I brought today, and I was showing this to some of the assistant chiefs, this is my old police ID. It's a little faded. My hair's a little longer, a little blacker, and I look a little younger. But this is what I wore around my neck the year I was an AmeriCorps member, because I got pulled over 10 times that year by Montgomery County Police Department. And I realized after about the 3rd or 4th time that if I had it in my wallet, I didn't have the risk. It was a little risk because I'd have to reach for my wallet. And if I wore it around my neck, it would get recognized and I would be let go. And that's what happened on that second half of pullovers. So I know personally why we need to make changes. You know, fast forward 20 years, I'm a council member, I get pulled over by a state police officer, and I shared the experience. He said I stopped on the stop line, and the first 2 questions he asked were, is this your car? Because it was 6 in the morning, I was on my way to play basketball. I was in athletic gear and a black Lexus. And he said, is this your car? And do you have any outstanding warrants? I shared the experience, it went viral, because every day that's happening to people in our county, in our state, in our country, and it's not fair. And it does a disservice to the men and women who are trying to protect and serve. And when I ask our administration, why do we have these disparities, the answers are inadequate. And so this will help us get to those answers. And it's an important step in the process. Why does this happen? It happens because, and Montgomery County is not unique in this regard. You heard Robert White mentioned, you heard the police-involved killings we've had. We've had officers convicted and charged of assault. 6 months before George Floyd, we had an officer convicted of kneeing a handcuffed young man in the back of the neck. Could have killed him. Thankfully, it didn't. Could have broken his neck. Thankfully, it didn't. but that officer was charged and convicted of assault, rightfully so. So the system worked. But I tell people all the time, if you think it couldn't happen here, you're wrong. It could happen anywhere. And it's not because we have bad, racist individual officers. Are there some that have biases? Absolutely, everyone has a bias. The problem is the system, the structure, what we are told to do, how we are educated and trained, what we track or don't track, what we learn from those statistics, how we incentivize, where we send police officers to what we send them to do, that system produces unequal justice. And so that's why we must do this work to dig into the data, to understand what we can do better, to change the form and function of our police department so that we can have everyone have equal justice under the law. And I truly believe that our police administration, our county executive, the council members, we all want that goal. I know individual police officers, some that I've known for 20 years, who have worked to achieve that goal. So that's what we're trying to do today. This report is important. It's not going to be easy. It hurts when you rip off a scab, but we have to tell the truth and we have to make dramatic changes because the system we have is producing unequal justice. And it's not fair to the officers, it's not fair to the community, and it's not fair to our county. We have the responsibility to do better. And I believe that Montgomery County is a great county, and we have a great police department. But I believe that we can do better for more people. And so that's why I'm here today. I really appreciate ELA and David and his group and the county executive for putting this forward. And I look forward on the council to working with my colleagues to implement a lot of these recommendations. Last thing I'll say, we have to be vigilant. When I got on the council, I was elected in 2018, sworn in December 4th. On January 15th, this was right after Robert White was killed, I introduced the first criminal justice reform bill, I was told by the council, that had ever been introduced, at least in 20 years. Now they've told me ever. The Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act to create independent investigations in all police-involved deaths. That is law. It's now state law. That happened in 3 years. A lot has happened in the last 3 years, and we have a lot more to do. So progress can happen, it will happen, and I look forward to working with this group to make it happen. Thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Willie Parker Lone, one of 5 Assistant Chiefs of Police and Chief of the Patrol Services Bureau. In Chief Jones's absence, he would like for me to share. The Montgomery County Police Department acknowledges the excellent work thus far provided by effective law enforcement for all regarding the current audit. The department continues to assist with an in-depth view and analysis of policies, practices, and procedures for effective police reform of this agency. We are committed to being a better police department and providing excellent police service for everyone. I would like to say the Montgomery County Police Department is a very good department, but we understand that we can be better. Our hope is that this in-depth audit will highlight both the positive and the negative and offer best practices for improvement. As a department, we have been fully supportive of the audit being conducted by Effective Law Enforcement for All. CEO David Douglas, Executive Director Dr. Ashley Burns, and their team initially met with Chief Jones and the Assistant Chiefs. They then met with sworn and professional staff department subject matter experts during the course of the audit. We have provided access to specific divisions, work sites, as well as our policies and procedures to ensure the auditors are able to conduct a thorough examination of the department. In short, if the auditors asked for information, documents, and access to staff, we provided it. In closing, we embraced this audit. Remember, Chief Jones discussed the importance of an audit during his confirmation hearing. We are glad that this audit is happening and look forward to continuing to assist the auditors as we move towards effective policing. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lee Holland. I'm the Vice President of FOP Lodge 35 in Montgomery County. First, I want to appreciate the time and effort that Mr. Douglas and his staff took on this project and the work that they're doing. I think it's extremely important. Although Lodge 35 might not think that everything is the best fit for our department, there is a lot in here that we actually do appreciate and do look forward to implementing here in this county. Several key areas that Lodge 35 wants to implement as soon as possible include refunding our crisis intervention strategies that were eliminated during the recession. That would include mobile response units that partner police officers, mental health workers, and EMS workers together. We also must provide crisis intervention training to all Montgomery County police officers. We need to return to problem-oriented policing, which was abolished here in the early 2000s. Community policing should be the foundation for all police officers. We should no longer evaluate police officers on how many people they arrest or how many tickets they issue. Officers should be evaluated on how they provide a better quality of life to the community of Montgomery County through problem-oriented policing. And we should move to a softer uniform. Studies have shown that a more casual police uniform reduces use of force incidents. Also conveyed in this report and pointed out by President Hucker is Montgomery County police officers are one of the lowest paid in the region. Lodge 35 has attempted to work with the county to increase pay and benefits for Montgomery County police officers to help attract and retain quality police officers. For example, 2 years ago, Lodge 35 and the executive agreed to a 5% pay increase in starting pay. It was rejected by the council. These two councilmen voted for it, but the other ones rejected. We will continue to advocate for enhancements to police officers' pay and benefits through the collective bargaining process. I look forward to partnering with the county executive to implement positive changes to make this great police department even better. Lodge 35 has always believed that policing strategies should be reevaluated on a regular basis, but community policing should be the priority. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Douglas. I'm the CEO of Effective Law Enforcement for All. On behalf of myself, our Executive Director, Dr. Ashley Burns, and our team, we actually thank you for being here, but we more importantly thank and acknowledge the trust the county has placed in us to help it work through this important project. We were interviewed by County Executive Elrich and all council members, and we appreciate those. We met early on with Chief Jones, and so that really put us on a footing for a truly collaborative effort, and that's what it has been. I should quickly say I would also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge another partner of ELE 4A, which is my firm, Shepard Mullen, has formed a police reform program and partnership, and through that, they've made my services available to the county at no charge. And I've otherwise managed to become a pretty expensive guy. It's important to understand that we weren't brought in to start this process or to lead this process. We were brought in to support this process, to be a resource for this process. This process had begun when we were brought in, and it began with a public task force focused on reimagining public safety and its vision for law enforcement and public safety services in Montgomery County. We started by supporting their work, and I can say that they worked hard and tirelessly and took their task very seriously, so I should thank the members of the task force. I should particularly thank and acknowledge the work of its co-chairs, Bernice Miracu North and Mark Maurer. County Executive Elrich did not give the task force much time to do its work and to come up with its recommendations, and they rose to the challenge, and their findings provided a firm foundation for us to inform our work and our audit of the Montgomery County Police Department going forward. So it was a tremendous asset in terms of understanding the county's vision for public safety. I also want to thank the Montgomery County Police Department, particularly Chief Jones and Assistant Chief Parker Lone. From the outset, they were invested in this project. Chief Jones had called for a review of the police department. Usually we're forced on people, but that was not the case in our work here in Montgomery County. And as Assistant Chief Parker Lone said, they've made themselves available. We have talked to everyone at every level. Our folks have visited with them. In fact, many of our meetings were less audits and more brainstorming sessions about what policing can be in Montgomery County. So we are very appreciative of that commitment to this project. I want to thank the county council members, particularly Council President Hucker, Council Member Jawando, who have been leaders on this effort. In fact, one of the unusual things about this project, usually we make findings and then the fighting starts. Here from Montgomery County, we make findings and sometimes they're ahead of us. Sometimes they're like, okay, when can we get started? But there have been many, many initiatives at the agency level and at the state and local legal level sort of driving the kinds of changes that we as an organization see as the model for policing. I should say that Effective Law Enforcement for All, we're a nonprofit organization. We were formed because we actually believe, despite some of the divisions we hear about today, that police and the public actually in the main share the same vision for law enforcement services. They should be both safe and effective for police and the communities they serve. And we have seen throughout that when we can bring communities together with the police in a process of education and engagement, listening and understanding, we can make changes that are impactful and are sustainable. And we think actually that's one of the reasons we were so honored to be asked to do this, because we believe the work here that the Reimagining Public Safety initiative is undertaking will not only make a difference for county residents, but we think it's going to be a model for the country. I want to thank Carolyn Sturgis for all her work making the trains run on time and helping us do more than just talk and think, but to get things done. And of course, last but not least, I want to thank County Executive Mark Elrich. He has been the driving force behind this. He has pushed us hard. He has been engaged, deeply engaged at every level. In fact, I had planned to make a joke about the number of meetings we had to cancel or postpone because he kept our team over talking about our findings and understanding solutions, but he already acknowledged that he had spent a lot of time doing that. But it is absolutely true. So across the board, the leadership in Montgomery County at every level has been completely committed to this project, and frankly, without that commitment, none of these changes would be possible or would matter. So we really do, again, thank you all for the trust you've placed in us. It's really been a privilege, and it's an ongoing privilege to help you in your mission. Okay, so with that, let me turn to actually what we found. I should note that there are many changes. This is a snapshot in time of an interim report. As I admit, many initiatives are already underway. There are state and county level legal changes, so those will all impact our recommendations and our finding at the end of the day. I also apologize. Whenever you do thanks, you leave one out. And I left out an important one, the Fraternal Order of Police, Lee Holland. They actually have also been invested in this project. They've adopted many of our, they support many of our recommendations, but they have also made themselves available. We've spoken with them quite a bit, and we look forward to continuing to do that. So thank you very much. Okay. The last introductory comment I'll make is that Montgomery County Police Department, we need to understand not just a good department, it's a great department. It's a model for departments across the country. But we weren't brought in to tell you what you do well. We're brought in to suggest things you could do better. And like any high-performing organization, that's your commitment as well. So let me give you a brief overview of the areas we've looked at and some of our key findings. So we began this process conducting interviews, reviewing documents, talking to people, classic lay of the land stuff. We looked at the police department's policy and accounting systems. We've looked at its organizational structure and policing practices, education, training, leadership, and management. And we'll continue to do this, that I'll get to in a bit, ultimately including data systems and innovation opportunities. Today I want to talk about some of our preliminary findings in the areas of mental health response, use of force and internal affairs, early intervention system, education and training, recruitment and hiring practices. In the area of mental health response, which has been a significant issue and concern in the community, we think there is a need and opportunity, has already been acknowledged, to strengthen crisis intervention training. As a general matter, what we have observed, fortunately, is that Montgomery County has tremendous resources to devote to the issue of mental health. But what we found is that they're often underutilized, poorly coordinated, and in some instances, outdated. But the good news is the county has at its disposal the tools it needs to really achieve its vision for handling and supporting those who are having are in mental health crisis. It's already been mentioned, we do recommend a specialized crisis response CIT officer model. We believe that there should be, that all officers at all levels should be required to have crisis intervention experience in order to establish a culture in which the entire department understands and is equipped to address the mental health issues it's called upon to confront. We recommend appointing a CIT coordinator and developing a comprehensive strategy that embraces not only the entire department, but the entire ecosystem of agencies and organizations and individuals whose involvement is necessary to effectively address mental health crisis. Consistent with that, we recommend that you restructure, strengthen, and increase communication between the entities that form this ecosystem. We recommend enhancement and strengthening of internal and external data collection systems. That's actually a through line that you'll hear through many of our recommendations. In order to understand a problem, manage a problem, hold people accountable for performance, you have to have the data. We all say you manage what you measure, and we think there's tremendous need and opportunity for Montgomery County to strengthen its ability to measure across the board. And we recommend establishing a behavioral health unit that has a real-time response capability. In the area of use of force in internal affairs, we recommend revising use of force policies to be more comprehensive and to provide greater guidance. That work is underway, and we continue to look forward to work with the department and the FOP on that project. We believe there is a need, however, to revise the policies for internal investigations to make them more independent, uniform, objective, and timely. For example, one of the things we identified is that many complaints are not truly investigated, they're reviewed. It tends to consist of a review of the statements, but there is no true objective investigation of the underlying facts. And most leading departments in the country today, as Montgomery County aspires to be, do commit to investigating all complaints, including those that are filed anonymously. Administrative investigations should parallel, not follow, criminal investigations. There are many complaints that will trigger a criminal investigation, but as we all know, those investigations can be lengthy and can often be concluded without any charges filed. If administrative investigations wait for the conclusion of those matters, they don't start sometimes until years after the event. Makes it difficult to conduct a thorough investigation, and importantly, it undermines public trust in the department's commitment to hold its people accountable to high standards. So we recommend that, to the extent possible, administrative investigations parallel criminal investigations, not follow them. Develop a force investigation team to conduct serious use of force investigations. That's a well-established model to improve use of force, to hold officers accountable, and importantly, to learn the lessons that uses of force can offer the department for continued improvement. The department does have an internal investigative review panel. We think its role should actually be somewhat expanded to include looking at those opportunities to learn and improve. So, for example, what we've seen in other departments, there'll be a use of force. The following analysis will recognize that, the officer's approach to this situation placed the subject or the officer at risk. Let's take that back to the academy. If there's video, show the video, make it a lesson. So learn from past experience to improve future performance. And as I think it was Council President Hucker mentioned, we recommend expanding the use of body-worn cameras. We recommend that the city adopt an early warning and intervention system. Briefly, for those who don't know what they are, they're technology platforms. What we know is that officers who get in trouble, whether because of an excessive use of force or, frankly, issues like alcoholism, divorce, there are flags for that conduct. And if we look for those flags, we can help an officer and intervene before a problem becomes a tragedy. And an early warning system helps us to do that. What it does is it tracks some of those markers, like unexcused absences, an increase in the number of complaints, increase in the number of uses of force, other signs that something is going on. And when it sees those signs, it alerts a supervisor, so that supervisor can check in and intervene early. So these systems should be understood as an aid to saving careers and also to preventing misconduct and violations. They're tremendous systems that ultimately save money because they save careers. Education and training. The department has a tremendous training academy. What we see is a need to focus on what we call a whole officer conduct. Today, what we see training tends to be focused on tactical skills, shooting, handcuffing, those things that we typically associate with police work. But today, police officers are required to use a much broader range of skills. And we want to focus on those range of skills for the officer so they bring them their whole selves to the job, so that they get training in procedural justice, bias-free policing, cultural diversity, de-escalation trainings. And we believe that these should be incorporated throughout the curriculum. So for example, if there's a traffic stop exercise, that should include a procedural justice element. They should be trained to spot cultural issues. These elements should be woven throughout the curriculum. We think the training should promote and follow a guardian culture. I think many people have heard about that, the warrior mentality versus the guardian mentality. Ultimately, what policing is about public safety, not just the safety of the citizens, the victims, the people who call them for help, but the safety of the people in their custody. And that is, quite frankly, where Derek Chauvin failed, and as well as the officers who allowed it to happen. We should provide for peer intervention training. One of the partnerships of my firm is the Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement program, in which we train officers how to intervene. There's already a duty to intervene, but the science tells us that there are powerful psychological inhibitors to intervention. The ABLE program trains officers how to break through those barriers and to intervene before misconduct happens. Again, that kind of training has been demonstrated to save both careers and lives. Should strengthen supervisor training. The way a department operates is truly governed by the extent to which it has close and effective supervision. Those are the ones who know what should be done and know what's happening on the street. We believe that there's opportunities to strengthen supervisor training to ensure that officers are held to the standards that the department has set for them. And as has been mentioned, hire a civilian PhD as the director of academics or a co-director. It seems to me we do police officers disservice when we talk about training police officers. Today, we don't need to train police officers. We need to educate them. And we educate people at academies with truly pedagogic curriculum. And that's what we should move to here in Montgomery County. Recruitment and hiring. The one we lead with is increased starting salaries for police officers. Officers here, this is a great county to work in, but they can drive 5 minutes and go to the next county and make more money, and that's just not in the county's interest. So we recommend increasing starting salaries. We believe that with data systems, there's opportunity to better assess employee turnover and the reasons that they're leaving the department. As every organization knows, replacing people is one of their most expensive items. So every person you can retain longer is a savings to the county. And add a cloud-based technology for the recruitment process. Currently, it's on paper, and there is no one who would recommend that you run any important function on paper today. Those are our findings thus far, but we are continuing to look at use of force and internal affairs and to dialogue with the department about that. I look forward to working with Assistant Chief Patello, who I actually met at the Department of Justice on issues of community policing and engagement. We'll be looking at operations and management, systems and technology, and bias-free policing. So, again, thank you very much for asking us to help you with this important project. We are truly inspired and impressed by the work that has been done, And I should say, on a point of personal privilege, I'm a Montgomery County resident. I live in Silver Spring, and so I'm proud to be part of a county that is committed to this process of improvement, though. So thank you all very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. That concludes our presentation for today. We did set some time aside for questions. So if you have any questions for our county leaders, the county executive, our council members, or Mr. Douglas regarding the report, we will entertain those questions now. I ask that you state your name and your media affiliation before you pose your question.
So the question was, what are the most important recommendations we make for the police department? So when we think about what's important for a police department to accomplish, we really see it through the lens of what the community wants. So here in Montgomery County, the two biggest concerns are mental health crisis and use of force, particularly against black and brown people. So our most important recommendations are in those areas. I do want to underscore, thank you for the question, an important point is the intersectionality between mental health crisis and race in police uses of force. 25% of police uses of force are with people in mental health crisis. When you look at use of force against black and brown people, there's often a mental health element. So what the county really should do is, so our most important recommendations are mental health crisis, use of force, because that is the intersection. And if you make changes in those areas, you will dramatically improve your mental health response and dramatically reduce your use of force. So those are our two most important recommendations.
So I'm going to add two to his list because I agree completely with what he said, but I think there are two other things that are really important. One is the internal accountability, what we do with internal affairs and how things get investigated. You don't know what you don't examine. And if we don't know and if we're not following up on reports and complaints, then we don't get a full picture. And I know from my conversation with them that we don't have a full picture of what's happening. The other part is the training component. You can't do these other things unless you actually redo how we train people. And so you can't de-escalate unless I have better de-escalation training. If you're trained that you arrive on the scene and you're pulling out the gun, you're shouting, to get down on the ground and pointing a gun at somebody, you probably are foregoing the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody before it escalates. And so the training and the accountability parts are critical to me. But I totally agree about the mental health piece. It is huge. I mean, I think of almost everything that's happened here that's gone south and involves somebody in a mental health crisis. And things escalated way too fast, and we didn't have the ability to pull back, and officers didn't have the ability to make decisions that would have maybe prevented that from happening. And I'm not saying there wasn't a role for an officer there, but the training and how you respond to a situation like that is really critical. And our folks, I personally don't feel radically prepared for doing something that might have avoided the outcomes.
Can I just clarify on the body cameras, what the expanding that, does that include the plainclothes officers? Is that the recommendation, or?
I'm a big believer in expanding the body cameras. The only person I think you can't put a body camera on is an undercover officer, because you're kind of not undercover if you're wearing a camera on your shirt. But in terms of jump out teams, if the moment you're having public interaction and it's no longer a secret investigation, but you're in public, the cameras ought to be on. So I think the jump out teams and any SWAT teams, all these folks, none of it's a surprise. So anything you're doing that doesn't involve the element of surprise ought to have the camera on, and the cameras ought to be on. One of the things we're looking on, we've talked with Axon about the cameras. We're looking at ways that the cameras can be automatically activated. We know that from Axon that a camera can be activated as soon as a gun is drawn from a holster. We know that a camera can be activated as soon as an officer opens the door of a car. So there are some things we can do that'll give us a more complete picture. Does that help? Yeah.
County Executive Elrich, Councilmember Reamer this morning issued a statement that was critical of this audit, and he says that it doesn't go far enough in terms of addressing some of the daylight between the union and the county council on the use of force policy, and that he's urging you to support his bill, or the council's bill that addresses the collective bargaining system. What do you say in response?
Well, in the first place, his bill largely has nothing to do with use of force. It's just simply making it difficult for unions to work with the police department. And I'm a big believer that it's one thing to say you need to do something, but talking to the people who actually have to implement it is probably a useful thing to do. That, none of us, I didn't know as a council member, I sure don't know as a county executive. I know what I want in terms of principle, but I know the working out of things, it's important to engage the workforce. And we've tried to engage our workforce broadly in the county as we do things, and I don't know why you wouldn't engage your workforce here. That bill no longer has anything to do with the use of force issue. I do agree that, we're looking at the use of force issue and the differences between the bill and the differences between the order, and we're going to resolve those. But we also have to resolve that in light of the state bill. And so we're trying to harmonize the council's actions with the state actions and with the latest changes to the use of force bill, so we have a bill that meets, as much as possible everybody's objective, but to the extent that the state trumps us in some places, it may, and it may be stronger, it may be weaker. We have not gotten an analysis back on that yet. But when we do, they will all come together. Yeah.
Yes, Willie Montgomery, this is for Mr. Douglas. Thank you for the work that you've done. Will your final report address any need for the potential of additional resources to match what your recommendations are at the conclusion of your report to address issues that your organization has found?
So the work we do is to work with communities to identify standards for what best practices policing and to make recommendations to help communities move in that direction. What we do not do is recommend to communities how much money they should spend to do that. That is above our pay grade, as they say.
Thank you.
I just want to add to that. Like, there are a couple of things in the county that we just have to do. Part of it is, the things we want to do in terms of decriminalization and mental health supports. You can't walk away from that because of the price tag. Because if you walk away from it, nothing gets fixed. And if there are things we need to enhance training and to enhance support for the police, and I did put in the money for a pay increase because we knew a couple of years ago that we were way out of line, that you've got to find the resources to do that. That's just a commitment. It's a commitment I have to dealing with this. We will figure out how we get this done, because there's no point in doing a study and saying you need to do this stuff and say, we don't have the money. The cost to the community and, in terms of trust and in terms of other costs to the community far outweighs what it's going to cost us to put this stuff in the budget.
So thank you for that commitment, sir.
I just want to say something on that. So I'll give you an example. I introduced a bill a couple weeks ago, the Community Informed Police Training Act. Adds 5 weeks of training. And some of the things you saw today, de-escalation, history of policing, racial equity, social justice. That can be embedded into the academy. It could lengthen the time that we're figuring out. We'll figure that out in the process. But if you go to Europe, you go to other places, they're educating their officers 1, 2, or 3 years. It's an educational setting. That's going to cost more money. There are other examples on the other end. I also have been very advocating of removing police from schools, removing police from mental health interactions. There are some places, there's some puts and takes in this, in my view, in that as we reform and reimagine, some things are going to cost some more money. If police are doing less mental health, less dealing with people experiencing homelessness, not in the schools, go down the list, there's some things where you can reallocate there. Less traffic, right? That there's some steps taken in that direction. So I think we're working our way through that process. It's not going to be a one-for-one. Some things are going to cost more money. I agree we have to pay our first-year officers a higher salary. I voted for that. But it's going to be a combination, and I think the public needs to understand that.
I had one question for Lee Holland. You had mentioned some areas of the audit that the union agrees with when it comes to community policing and those sorts of things. Are there any areas that the union would disagree with?
We're still looking over the audit to see exactly what we agree with, what we don't. For the parallel investigations, we do agree with that, but not to the point that IAD should handle both criminal and internal investigations. We believe that should be separate still. Having a criminal investigator do criminal investigations and internal affairs keep it internal, as that's two different processes. Anything else, we haven't really dived too much into it. We just got it the other day, and we're still looking through it.
Since you're there, I just wanted to see your thoughts about kind of changing that mindset of an officer. You know, when you talk about going from a warrior, I would think that's been a traditional mindset of many people in law enforcement, having, wanting to be a hero and things like that, and changing it to being a guardian. That seems like a very big transition. I just want to see what your thought is on that.
It's about the training, right? It's how you're trained. So if you've been here for 15 years and you were trained as a warrior, yeah, it's going to be hard to change to a guardian mindset. I know here 25, 30 years ago, we trained as guardians. We did a lot more community policing, how we can handle problems within the community. We were guardians. Tactics changed nationwide, right? It wasn't just here, it was nationwide. People changed to a warrior mindset, and now it's going back to a guardian. And it's just the amount of time you have on the department is going to be harder to adapt, right? But the younger you have, it's probably more easier.
Do you feel like officers would be willing to do that, to try to
I think a majority will. Some might not want to, but I think a majority of our department will. We have a great police department, great people, and I think people are expecting that a change is going to happen, and they're willing to embrace the change.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for your patience and your time today. We're at the point of the agenda where we're going to wrap up with closing remarks from our executive, Mr. Elrich.
So I think, the guardian thing is a good thing to kind of start a conclusion with. This really is a fundamental change in how we look at things. And it's the 21st century. And we need to get back to taking a broader view of what the role of policing is. And, I grew up in the 60s. I am not unaffected by growing up in the 60s and my experiences with police. And I remember discussions in communities about police basically being an occupying army, a hostile occupying army. And if you know anything about the Chicago police or the Oakland police or frankly the Prince George's County police, these were departments that had grave, I would say, bad relations with the community, engaged in practices that none of us would find acceptable. And yet they were perfectly normal, nobody wound up in jail, and life went on. We need to wind up in a different place here, and we do need to take an approach where the officers look at the community as a whole. But I'll go back to training. People do what they're trained for. If we have a county that doesn't prosecute marijuana yet. We were stopping kids for marijuana, and when I asked why we're doing it, the answer I got was, well, I don't know if they got 10 grams or 10 pounds. The only way I can do is to stop them. I've seen video recordings of protectual stops, some of them really, really embarrassing. The officer didn't launch, the one I saw that was most egregious, the officer didn't launch the protectual stop. He was coached in how to do the protectual stop by an officer in another car. Those are the things that need to change. And if you don't want people doing it, you can't train them to do it. I can't send you to an academy. I can't say, take the supplemental class and then expect you not to do the things I told you to learn. So to me, it's really, really important that we make these changes. And I do want to give some credit to the FOP because a lot of the things that I found disturbing over time were things that they actually brought to me and said, do you know we're doing this, or do you know this is what else we're doing? I appreciated the fact that police officers were saying, we really don't want to be doing this, but this is what we're asked to do. So people have this perception that this is us versus the police, or the police are somehow, rogue units out there who are doing things. Police are like everybody else. Our employees do what we train them to do largely, on a good day, right? And if we train them a certain way and have expectations, those are the things that we're going to see reflected. Our goal is to make sure that what we train for is what we get. That if we want different policing, we're training for different policing. If we tell people they're important, we pay them like they're important. You're asking people to put their lives on the line. And here we are, the next to worst county in the region in terms of pay. That makes no sense. There's an inconsistency in underpaying people and then telling them you're valuable. I was a school teacher, I know this. So, it's important that our values are reflected in what we do. And I think it's important that the department and the officers feel that what we're asking them to do is a reflection of our values. It's not because we like or don't like police, it's because we've got values in the community. We need to make sure those values are carried out. To the extent that people have gotten guidance that we would now consider to be misguidance, we need to correct the guidance. But I believe, people want to do their job. You don't go into this, by and large, unless you, aren't committed to trying to make the community better. It's a little bit different than when I was a kid, too, because I remember some of the guys who wanted to be police officers, and they weren't particularly interested in that. But there's, when I talk to people now, there's a sense, and I've talked to a lot of young officers, they're in a very difficult time going into policing because they think they can make things better. We've got to enable them to make things better. We've got to make sure that the things we teach them to do will lead them down that path. So I'm very happy with this report. I really do. David, your work on this has been really outstanding. And I look forward to moving forward. And we are going to move forward. We're not going to take a lot of time. And I've told him this. I don't want a report that sits on a shelf. I want a playbook that I implement. And that's how we're going to go about this. Thank you.